Stephen, I mean, this is a pretty desperate outlook, isn't it, in terms of growth?
Well, we're delivering on the fiscal targets that we've set. This is a legacy, really, of the forecast from 2010, 2011, when there's an expectation that productivity would swing back to its pre-banking crisis levels. But we're clearing the deficit. It's down 3/4 from what we inherited at 9.9% in 2010. The OBR show that we're on track to continue to meet that. And at the same time, as part of a balanced budget, we're meeting some of the short-term challenges, but also delivering on the longer-term investment to address productivity with the infrastructure, the skills, the jobs, the things that Ken Clarke has just been talking. And I think his endorsement of the budget in terms of its balanced approach really reflects the feedback from many colleagues in the House.
But, I mean, this is at a time when global growth, we're seeing synchronised growth right across the world, America, China, even the EU, and yet our growth forecasts are being downgraded. That's not terribly good, is it?
Well, we've had 19 consecutive quarters of growth. And as I say, this is a legacy from 2010, 2011 that the OBR has chosen to correct. But if you look at areas, for example, foreign direct investment flows, which has doubled in the last year from 80 billion to 158 billion, there's a great deal to be confident with the direction of travel. But the Chancellor is also recognising we do need to do more on productivity. Some of that has been taken in previous budgets, so things like Crossrail will come on stream next year. Schemes like that will help. But we're recognising we need to do more, and that's why the Chancellor has increased the spending on infrastructure through the National Productivity Investment Fund, added an extra year, increased that by 8 billion. But also, as Ken Clarke just alluded to, it's also about getting the investment into skills, doubling the apprenticeship levy compared to 2010, having the technical training, having more people do maths A-level, an extra £600 for schools where each student does maths.
But the problem is, though, a lot of this is being paid for by extra borrowing. You're borrowing an extra 38 billion over the next 4 years. I mean, have you given up on balancing the budget?
No, this is a balanced approach, and this
Well,
really
it's
delivers.
38 billion of extra debt over 4 years.
Well, this delivers on the headroom that the Chancellor put in place last year. This is exactly what he intended when he put aside some headroom last year. We're still going to have £15 billion of headroom at the end of the scorecard period. We're still delivering on our fiscal target in terms of bringing the deficit down. But the headroom that the Chancellor put aside last year is also then being used to drive further our ambition on addressing productivity, which is recognised by the OBR.
But extra debt, 38 billion extra debt over 4 years. National debt's already at 1.7 trillion. We're going to be spending more on debt interest next year than on transport. I mean, that's really unacceptable, isn't it?
The OBR shows that debt is peaking this year and then is forecast to come down year on year. But the real contrast here is with the opposition that wants to borrow £500 billion that would drive a coach and horses through any fiscal targets and would leave a massive debt interest burden for future generations. So this is a balanced approach in the budget. We're meeting our fiscal targets. We've already got the deficit down by 3/4. The direction of travel is to take that further, but at the same time to get the productivity shifting to invest in the skills, the infrastructure that we've called for.
One last one. Stamp duty. You're cutting it for first-time buyers. The OBR says this is only really going to benefit people who own property already.
No, this will benefit many young people who don't have the bank of mum and dad to rely on, who struggle to get the deposit. But it's part of a wide range of packages around Help to Buy, 44 billion in total targeted on housing. We recognise we need to address the supply side, and there's a number of measures in the package to do that. There's measures in the white paper on housing that was brought forward earlier this year. But there's no magic bullet on housing. You need to do a suite of products, and this is one aspect of that.
All right, Stephen Barclay, got to leave it there, I'm afraid. Thanks for joining me. Well, that's a view from the government. Let's bring in the Shadow Economic Secretary to the Treasury now, Jonathan Reynolds. He joins us from Westminster. So good evening, Mr. Reynolds. Presumably you welcome this budget. I mean, the headline announcement on stamp duty was originally suggested by Ed Miliband.
Well, it's a budget that really didn't change anything, I think. I mean, if you look at what the Chancellor said today, it's still hard to see what he believes the overriding purpose of the government is, what is its mission, who's it trying to help and what's it trying to do. So if you take some of their proposals, I mean, the flagship policy of the government, universal credit, it's in major trouble. This budget, let's spend more money freezing alcohol duty than fixing universal credit. That doesn't really seem to make much sense to me. And now we're spending more preparing for Brexit than on the NHS, even though many people thought It was supposed to be the other way around. And on that stamp duty cut, yes, I'm not going to be churlish about that. That was a Labour policy. But I would disagree with Stephen when he says there's a lot in there to boost supply as well. I mean, that stamp duty cut is the major housing feature of this budget, if you look at the Red Book and the figures behind it. And of course, if you're just, again, boosting demand, which is what most of the government's housing policies have done, and you're not getting supply increased as well, you're going to have a huge problem there again.
A lot more borrowing and a lot more spending, though. I mean, this is precisely what Labour's been calling for, isn't it?
Well, we're more responsible, I would say, Ian, than the government. We wouldn't borrow for day-to-day spending, but we would borrow to invest. We've made that very clear. But I think if you look at the productivity downgrade, which, to be honest, is overdue in terms of what the OBR's forecasts have been for the last few big set-piece economic events, we have to find a way to get those productivity figures back on track. And that's got to require investment. We're going to struggle to see that investment from the private sector with all the uncertainty around Brexit because the government haven't been able to help with that. We need some big investments, particularly in transport infrastructure in the north. We think that's overdue and we think the country can afford to borrow to invest to deliver that.